name is Reed Galen. I am your host, and I would like to welcome my guest, the one and only Mike Brock. Welcome back.
I'm not actually the one and only. There's these two other Mike Brocks that are like also kind of like minor public figures, just to be clear. And I'm taking this introduction, which is like completely just throwing you off, like for no reason, but to
That's all
point
right.
out, yeah. And like I always like wonder, right? Like if they're upset at me because like on one hand, like one of the Mike Brocks, if you like go on Google,
Mm-hmm.
is is sort of like I think like a Christian pastor in Hawaii,
Yeah.
and then the other guy is like a fucking like corporate lawyer for like British Petroleum or something. I could be like, and
Right.
like and when people like search for like Mike Brock, you know, in like their world sphere, and they get my stuff, and you like wonder like what are their politics or like what are their worldviews, and like how
Right.
irritating is it that I have usurped your name as like the most popular Mike Brock on Google.
Well,
Anyways,
listen,
I don't know what I'm
those
talking about.
guys, those guys shouldn't be Googling themselves anyway. They should be doing something else. So no. Well, the only other Reed Galen I ever knew, he was a correspondent for I think CBS or NBC, like in the '80s. And
Yeah,
his name was Reed Galen. I think it was Reidgaylen. But
yeah.
everybody thought that was very funny.
Well, at
So,
least
what
you
are
had
the
the spell.
chances?
At least you had the difference in spelling. I don't have that
I know.
advantage with these two men.
No, well, you know what? Find a more interesting name next time, right? Like, I actually put this on you. You could call yourself whatever you want, right? I mean, you're out there blaming Mike Brocks left and right for, you know, it's not fair to them.
Yeah,
All right.
well,
Well, so Mike Brock Prime, we'll call you because I don't know the other guys. So we were just talking before we went live, that writing every day is hard,
yeah,
especially with everything going on. And it can be, drinking from the fire hose. I often advise people not to drink from the fire hose if they don't have to. They're not required to do that.
hmm
So, as you turn the spigot on and it's hitting full blast, what is it
hmm
that you're consuming the most of, or you think is worth consuming the most?
yeah. I mean, it's like hard to say. Like, I have like some like really weird like media consumption habits. Like so. I mean, so like what I try to do like when I'm just like tell you guys. I mean,
Hmm.
who cares, right? How does Mike Brock like consume the world? Well, uh, you know, I have like a few sort of go-tos. Like I'm a pretty like aggressive user. You've probably heard of Ground News.
Hmm.
It's really nice. I like the bias tool, the blind spot tool that they use. That's always kind of
Mm.
interesting to see how you have these sort of cleavages in coverage, like based on political alignment of various media sources. I'm also I also have a very unhealthy like I'm for the talking heads talk shows. So I will often scan Mediaite, which is Dan
Sure.
Abrams
Yeah.
property. Um, you know, I give that a scan every day. I sometimes click into those things and see what ridiculous things are happening on the Fox News and CNN and MSNBC panels, you know,
Right.
from the previous night. You know, and I know that like that's like what the boomers are seeing. Like I'm kind of like when I'm doing that, I'm like, this is what the boomers see. This is
Right.
boomer world. And then there's like, you know, other sort of more vanguard type younger, like sort of in the teens and the 20s. And if you really want to understand like what kind of political commentary those people are consuming, you have to go and look at like the streamers, like the
Mm-hmm.
streaming services and the sort of
So
the
like Twitch
Hassans,
and Discord and that
Twitch,
kind of stuff.
yeah, Hassan and Destiny, and there's like others, and like you know, there's these like you know, and a lot of like right wing motherfuckers, like you know, this that are on there as well, and I pay attention to them as well. I'll sometimes be like lying in bed at night, like watching you know the political commentary that the teeny boppers are talking about, you know, and so I try to do this to like I actually think like for me like when I'm thinking about like uh mapping out in my head like what the world looks like, I'm actually more thinking about like how are rather than asking myself the question like what is the the one true objective telling of the world. That's not the question I ask myself. My
Mhm.
question is how are all these various different age groups and geographical groups? I mean, look, I mean, I love, for example, like I love Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart's
Sure.
podcast, right? The rest is politics, and really hearing that sort of transatlantic view as well.
Well,
And
they're
so I do
very
this. I try,
smart, right? And
yeah,
they're
yeah,
pretty
yeah.
entertaining.
So I mean, uh, I try to consume media from as many different like sort of demographic and geographic perspectives as I can every
Yeah.
day, as opposed to sort of thinking about it in terms of like, like liberal versus conservative or left versus right media. It's more, I'm more of sort of a perspectivist in that sense, and really trying to like see like what is, and because like, and the reason like one might do that, right? If you, in my case, right, like I'm doing this because I want to find a way to make the world a better place. I mean, I'm just writing a fucking Substack. Like, who knows how much impact one can have just like, shouting into the void. But I mean, like in terms of thinking about like making my words matter,
Mhm.
I'm trying to find those threads, right, that that sort of exist across those sort of like perceptual domains, and then thinking like from there, like what's a narrative that would sort of like nibble at the edges and like cross those epistemic boundaries. And I write like that. I write to that,
Mhm.
and I think about what I'm doing not necessarily as like polemic. Like sometimes I do mythopoetry. Sometimes, I mean, I did polemic today. We can talk about that. But like, I sort of just think about like what I'm doing is sort of like journaling the world as I see it,
Yeah.
from a very like existentialist stance. And I know that sounds really fancy, but the way I sort of, but the way that like I sort of just sort of imagine myself in my own mind, and sort of this absurd play. I call it a circus. It's a metaphor, right? Like,
Right.
and
Sometimes it's
then
not even a metaphor.
yeah, yeah, and I write from that angle, right? And that's, and that's how you kind of get, I think that's fun. I think it adds a little bit of richness to things.
So
I'm fucking around. No one, I mean, it's my own space. I can do whatever I
right.
want. But that's what I do. That's how I write at Notes from the Circus.
So let's talk about the young folk, as
Yeah,
Peter Bjorn and John would call them.
yeah, the young
And
folk.
if you got that reference as a song, I applaud you. Is there anything, one, that surprises you from that demographic, and second, is there anything that does cut across that left right divide that surprises you as well?
Yeah, I mean, this the I think like older folk don't really realize there's this guy. People know him as Destiny. His real name's Stephen Bennell.
Okay.
And there's this other fellow, Hassan Piker.
Oh yeah, I know Hassan. I
And
know of Hassan. I don't know him personally,
yeah,
but yeah.
yeah. And there's uh who's, I'm trying to think about like and there's right wing figures as well, like in this world. Uh like Andrew Wilson, sort of like an example. He's this guy, he's like a fucking fat, like he's kind of like the destiny of like fascists, like, in my view.
Okay.
And these guys are really influential.
Yeah.
Like there's millions and millions of young people who sort of like live inside the narrative worlds that these individuals I just like listed, are talking about. And that can, and that's interesting, right? And I mean, in Destiny, Stephen Bennell, right, is I mean, he's highly influential. I mean, he's sort of the revanchist liberal, right,
Mhm.
of the group, right? And um he's more he's more I mean, I like him. I like him. I see him as sort of like a somebody who's probably going to like be a pretty important figure in American political commentary, as that group ages into, like, in the same way that, like, like he's like probably like where like Matt Iglesias was like in the early 2000s, like for like people like you and me. I
Mhm.
think someone like him is kind of like on that sort of trajectory to kind of being like a major uh like like political sense maker, within that sort of like rising cohort, and that's interesting. And so I pay attention to like what he's saying and the arguments he's
And
making.
so what are they saying? What is their perspective? I mean, I'm pretty clear on Hassan Piker that he's probably the most well-known mainstream.
Yeah,
As
yeah,
far as mainstream people.
he's the most, yeah. And yeah, I mean, it paints a picture, in my opinion, of a pretty contentious politics over the next 10 to 15 years. Um
Right.
uh it paints, I mean, it like I think so like this is sort of, I wrote this piece, "The Simulation is Collapsing," which it was, I didn't it's actually, I think it's like the third most read piece on Notes from the Circus ever, and that kind of surprised me because it was kind of a meandering piece where I kind of just went in sort of into a stream of consciousness mode and wrote it like just from a pure stream of consciousness.
Yeah,
I
but
wasn't
look, not everybody needs how you write op-eds, right?
Yeah.
Lead, conclusion, 7 points in the
Yeah.
middle, right? Like you don't need
Yeah,
that.
yeah. It was a stream of consciousness thing. I didn't even feel like it was like that good. Like when I hit post, and now it's like it's still like blowing up. But in that piece, like the case that I was sort of like making, right, is that, and I'll talk in like try and talk in less metaphorical terms. I'll talk to everyone like you guys are like adults, because you're adults. Sometimes I forget that we're all adults because I look at like the people I see on TV, who are running this country ostensibly, and I forget that that we're ostensibly all adults. This is but in the point I was trying to make in that piece is that there's this, I call it a simulation. Another way of thinking about it, right, is just as a story we've told ourselves about how the world works, what the world is, like where we've come from, where we're going to, this sort of central narrative. Like, I mean, you and I, Reed, I can probably like, I think like when I talk to you, because of your age, I think you're a little bit older than me, but I think I'm still kind of like generationally in the same space as you, like politically, like that sort of like, like post this sort of the post-war, post-Cold War, sort of like, post-war liberal consensus, Fukuyama, end of history. Like you and I sort of, I think, kind of, have our sort of like starting point in that world of like that's what
Generation X.
Yeah, that's what norm. I'm an older boomer, but like, I mean, I'm still like narratively like in that sort of space. I'm like the oldest boomer. I was born in 1981, so I'm like year one of I'm sorry of the millennial. Sorry, older millennial. Sorry, guys. Guys, see this? This is me getting older. Look at that right there. There's the first sign of,
you have reading glasses
cognitive decline.
If you don't have reading glasses, we don't want to hear from you.
I mean, it's like, but so like, in that narrative frame, there's this thing we say, normal, right? Normal is like what, Barack Obama, like opening his desk in the Oval Office and seeing the note from George W. Bush, wishing him well,
and Bill
right?
Clinton from the other George H.
Yeah, you're in that sort of like, like that, you and me, like we're just like, that's normal. That's how the world's supposed to work. And like, I want that world. I want the world to be like that, like, at least like, in the main. But I'm also sort of like, I'm historically grounded, philosophically grounded. And I can see like very clearly, like by any reasonable stretch of the imagination, that the world I am living in right now is not one that one can reasonably think has any paths back to that normal from where we are right now. That is not the place that we're in. And that's scary. And like, I mean, you know that, Reed, and I see you. You're ready to take this establishment down. Like, like, I mean, you're on board with this.
Listen, I grew up in it, right? I was
Yeah.
literally in the heart of it. Right?
Yeah.
Most of my, until I was basically 31. right?
Yeah.
I was in it from damn near birth until, you know, 15 years ago, 20
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
But and not even outside of it, really. The only time I really left the establishment, or I guess the establishment was crushed, was when Trump came around, and I said I don't want anything more to do with it. Right. So like
Mhm.
I like it's like, I know how it works and I know how bad it can be because I've lived it.
Yeah.
Right. And I've helped it along.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, and like, talking about like the establishment's like always kind of like a weird thing to me too. I'm like, I want to be clear. I kind of sometimes like feel a little bit uncomfortable like being like using the word anti-establishment, because the establishment is really not a thing in the way, like, when we say establishment, you build this picture up in your head, right? It sounds almost like an institution of a kind, and in some ways it is, but what it really is a culture. Establishment just means elite culture. That's what it means. It means the same thing as that. And so like in a society with elites at the top, in a stable society, one would expect there to sort of like be a culture of among elites who do elite things. Like, I seem to have lost you, Reed. I'm not sure if I should stop talking. I don't know if people can see me. There you
Mike,
go. Hey, what's up, man?
did you keep talking?
I
I hope you
no,
kept talking.
I stayed here and stared into space, into
You
the
know,
void.
well, I'm sorry about that, guys.
It's
It
okay,
turns
right?
out that sometimes that running a television show from your home office is not yet perfected. So, all right. So we were again. Sorry for the technical difficulties. All right. So, Mike, you were talking about when I disappeared. The establishment. You feel a little bit uncomfortable calling
Yes.
yourself any-establishment or
Yeah, yeah.
using the
So
expression.
yeah, so well, I mean, you when you do your editing, you can see what I said. Like, I said a little bit more than that. But like,
Sure.
look, my like the way, like, when you think about the establishment is another way of saying elite culture,
Hmm.
right? That's what it
Right.
is. Elite culture. That's what that means. That's what it means. Um, and uh, and that's not like a good or a bad thing, like, right? Like in a society where you're going to have leaders, you're going to have members of Congress and senators, and you're going to have heads of agencies and people who captain, institutions and corporations and labor unions and stuff like that. You're going to have an elite class in society,
Hmm.
right? And so the question is like, what is the culture of that elite, right?
Hmm.
And that culture is what we call the establishment, right? The norms that culture imposes on itself, and sort of uses, sort of like act as sort of a signal of membership in that group. This is like what
Hmm.
it is, like, sociologically. um and the reason why the current establishment culture needs to be overthrown is not because it's evil per se. It's because it is a culture that has traditions and ways of moving that are meant for a world that doesn't exist anymore.
Correct.
That is the reason why the continuation of allowing this sort of like establishment culture, particularly, and if we're talking very specifically about the top of the Democratic Party, why that needs to crumble is not like just because, like, like Chuck Schumer should be in handcuffs. That's not what I'm saying. Or I think anyone else is saying. It is saying that, like, you guys like literally do not know what's going on, because like you
Hmm.
guys are stuck inside a political culture that grew up in a world that that just doesn't exist, and you guys continue to move in the same ways and talk in the same ways and make actions and expect counter reactions that don't come, and this confuses you. Like, I do the thing, you're not doing the thing that you're supposed to. Why isn't this happening? I'm confused,
Right.
right? Maybe like, why isn't this happening? Okay, get the consultants in here. Bring the consultants in here. Let's
Right.
set up
What
a
does the
focus
polling
group.
say?
Yeah, what
Right.
does the polling say? So it's like it has ossified into this thing that you know that sort of complexity theorists might suggest is a complex adaptive system that has sort of lost its ability to measure and adapt relative to its environment, and for that
For sure.
reason, the establishment needs to fall.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, there's different ways to describe it, but um, when I was talking to somebody the other day, when Trump leaves, whenever that is, right? Um, the establishment, yeah, I mean, of the Democratic Party, we could talk about forever, but of the Republican Party too, there will be plenty of people in Washington, D.C., who gave up everything to go work for Donald Trump, perhaps multiple times for
Mhm.
multiple years.
Yeah.
And when he's gone, they will be accepted back into polite Washington society. They will be
Yeah,
accepted back into the
not if
matrix.
not if I have anything to do
No,
with it,
I
Reed.
agree. I
Not
agree with
if
you
I have
100%.
any. God damn it! If
But
as what
that's what will happen because
I mean,
well, I mean, because you know what is like they'll dine out on the crazy stories they tell from the Oval Office, right? Oh well, Mike was never that bad a guy.
yeah,
Like it's the business, right? Like we all got the business, and that's that. I mean, I'll tell. Let me just tell you a quick story. I mean, this is probably 3 years ago now. I got invited to a very fancy dinner with all these Democratic grandees at his beautiful home.
Mm,
Probably not going to get invited to another one,
sounds
and
stuffy.
it was the food was lovely, the people were nice,
Sounds stuffy.
but it
I don't
was
get
the
invited.
kind.
I used to get invited to things like that when I used to be a sort of like inside the reservation tech CEO.
Sure.
I don't get those
Yeah, look,
invitations
and
anymore.
we get occasionally they show up and by accident, whatever. But it was interesting to hear them talk. And remember, this is before 2024. This is probably maybe 2 years
Yeah.
ago. So this is 23, and they're talking about how Ron DeSantis, he could really be president, and he if in 2028. And I'm like,
Mhm.
why do any of you think that there's going to be a 2028? And they all looked at me like a second head had grown out of my shoulders, right? Like they just couldn't, for them, the imagination can't wrap its head around the idea that like the empire could fall, that whatever it is we've known would not be known, at least not in any way that we would think of it. And I think that's one of the things that concerns me the most, is that we're heading toward 2026. We all say, oh well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Then we have an election. All things considered, everything went the way it was supposed to. Okay, that
Yeah.
means it'll happen the way it's supposed to again. But 2028, like who knows, right? And on the Republican side, let's wave some magic pixie dust and say that Trump does leave or agrees to leave. Like you got all these people running as Republicans, you got running all these people running as Democrats, and they're all going to be saying, generally speaking, that the world is okay, right?
Mhm.
The Republicans will be saying, look how great Donald Trump was. You should leave us in charge. And the Democrats will say, if you reelect us, we'll put the Department of Education back the way it was.
Yeah.
We'll put USAID. We'll put the sign back up at USAID.
Yeah.
When again, what the people are still going to want is a change agent, because they've gotten change several times. They're still unhappy with it. Who could blame them, frankly? But the establishment is incapable of providing that to the people, which is how you get somebody like a Trump in the first place.
Mhm.
Because in 2016, look, I talk about establishment blindness. I thought Hillary would win by 9 o'clock Eastern time, right? But what did the
Yeah.
country say? I don't want that again. I'm done with it.
Mhm. Yeah. It's a complicated like story, right? You're right. You're right. That like we just have to say it, right? That we've become we become a stratified society in terms of and we've created a really large elite class, actually, like the
Oh, we
elite
talked
class.
about this the last time you were on. Yeah.
Yeah, and by doing that, we've created like a problem, right? Because the elite class is so big, it's like 20% of the population. Like I would say the top 20th percentile. It's kind of
Hmm.
a Pareto
Right.
distribution. Is is that supports a fairly large like economy. It supports a large information economy that serves itself, that serves its own interest,
Yeah.
that are consumers of and producers into. uh and that's like kind of like one of the like that's the reason like why the sort of like the media ecosystem, like the way that it is, like the sort of establishment narrative is so hard to dislodge, is because um the people with the most money in society who are paying for New York Times subscriptions are still the richest people in society, and
Yeah.
they're not exactly heterodox thinkers by the very nature that they exist and at the sort of the top of the social strata. And so you have this is sort of like a real structural problem when you sort of look at it from this angle and you kind of zoom out and think really carefully about this, and then ask yourself like, well, if it is this sort of structural phenomenon in the social, economic, and political superstructure of the United States, and obviously this is a pattern that's repeating across the liberal democratic world, um is like, how do you like change this? Like, how do you break the way in which power and money has become distributed this way? um Now you have, now the good news is, right, like, um I'm one of those people in that elite class, and so there's a lot of other people
Hmm.
who are a little bit more civic minded than our fellow members of the elite class. And we're kind of coming down, we're kind of climbing the ladder down and being like, look guys, we're with you.
Hmm.
Right.
Right.
And that's, and that's like, for me, like the way that manifests is like, a lot of my old friends just don't want to talk to me anymore, because like they're like, fuck man, you're trying to blow up our world, Mike. I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah man. And like, and
Right. Yes.
yeah,
Correct.
and um but I mean, like, one shouldn't like understate the size of the problem, and how it's going to take us the better part of 10 to 15 years of political combat and economic sort of pain, and lots of other kinds of pain along the way. Like the from the time that sort of the progressive era reforms didn't happen in, they didn't happen in 6 months. They happened over a matter of years. And the New
Right.
Deal didn't happen in months. It happened over like periods of years. And
Right.
these were tough adjustments. And I mean, obviously, the much of that being in the case of the New Deal under Roosevelt, under the conditions of World War
Right.
concurrently. And so I mean, like it just needs to be said that like we're in a period like that, right? Like, I mean, I hope that similar to that period, it doesn't include a world war.
Right.
I don't think the chance is zero on that count, that we could find ourselves in a kinetic conflict. It's not hard to scenario analyze plausible ways we could get there. And there's certainly a lot of
Well,
people who are
moving the
worried about
Gerald
that.
Ford to the Caribbean is a good start.
I mean, yeah, I mean, like, I mean, Venezuela. So I have friends in the Venezuelan opposition. I'll just like say this like publicly. Like I know Leopoldo Lopez and his wife Lilian Tintori like personally, and I love these people. I love the Venezuelan opposition. Um, and I think Maduro is like fucking like evil, right? I mean,
Yeah.
in the case of Leopoldo, right? Like he had he was like he was he was a former mayor of Caracas, and he was imprisoned by the Maduro regime and
Right.
under like tortured, actually tortured. Like, so this is an evil regime, right? The man at the palace of Miraflores, in Caracas. I mean, this is an evil motherfucker. Like, I don't want to I don't want to mince words, right? Like, I will celebrate the man's death, like I will, right? But you know, one has to sort of think about, right, there's more to the story than the fact that the man at Mini Flores is evil, right? It's also the case that that, you know, we're a constitutional republic, that the power to make war is rests with the Congress. The founders were quite clear about this. They thought that an executive being able to wage war unilaterally was one of the greatest sort of dangers to the republic. We could read
unfortunately, Johnson, Nixon, and Bush and Trump all disagree with you.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, like, you know, Congress has been complicit, right? I mean, that AUMF that Congress passed
Still in action.
is still, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, like, you know, there's been like attempts, right, to like, you know, I think like Tim Kaine has had like a fucking like 8-year mission to try and cancel that AUMF, but
right.
So I mean, Congress has been complicit in this. But I mean, like, it's clearly like unconstitutional for Donald Trump to start a war here. Like, everyone should know this, right? Like, I don't give a fuck what the War Powers Act says. I mean, any reasonable reading to me of the War Powers Act would suggest to me that Trump would only be authorized to engage in warlike activities on a defensive posture relative to like a real or apprehended invasion of the United States or its direct interests. That's what that I mean. Like, that's what I would understand, like, having read and sort of and summarize to myself what I think that law says. Right. I think starting an offensive war for the sake of toppling the regime, and it does appear that they're going to try and use, you know, international terrorist organization designation to try and muddy the water here, which is how they're going to try and bridge their way back to that authorization for the use of military force. That's what AUMF means for the people listening at home. And that is like just such clearly a bullshit construction. Founders are like rolling in their fucking graves that, like, you know, like, this is incredibly dangerous. And honestly, like, I mean, it looks like it's going to happen. I mean, they're like you have Marines, like 15,000 Marines in assault landing craft that are doing practice landings, like training to, you know, invade coastal Venezuela by sea. I mean, this is fucking serious. And you know, and I know that, like, some of my friends in the Venezuelan opposition, you know, I think they see it a little bit differently than me. I haven't spoken to them, by the way. Like, I want to be clear. Like, I haven't had any conversations with my connections to the Venezuelan opposition since this whole thing began. But, you know, I do know that, like, you know, like, for example, I mean, I do know that, like you have like Sergey Brin's like girlfriend, you know, she's sort of close to major Venezuelan opposition figure, and I know that that's like one of the ways in which sort of a lot of pressure is trying to be put on Trump to engage in sort of a regime change operation. You know,
I just assumed it was oil
in Caracas. I mean, I think that's a confluent interest, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I think for Trump, you know, I think and I think for the administration, I think it's sort of a story of sort of a short victorious war type scenario, especially with the Epstein scandal. Like, I'm really worried that we're going to wake up one day to breaking news that Donald Trump is starting a speech, you know, let's start with on my orders. And so I'm really deeply concerned about that, because we started talking about this because we were talking about World War. And I'm not just sort of, and I think that's actually kind of the more concerning angle, right? For me, when I sort of think about the dynamics of something like that, is sort of the way in which the world sees it. Like, I don't think Americans really appreciate um, how the world looks to non-Americans right now.
Right.
Like particularly like our close allies, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, Germany, France, like sort of our powerful key allies
Right.
looking at us like they are terrified. They see a malicious force, a menacing force, in command of you know U.S. hard power, and
And wrecking all soft power we might have ever had.
yeah, and from that vantage point, I mean, you're in a like the calculation. You have to sort of like I don't like thinking in terms of real politique, generally speaking, because I'm kind of a bit of a fucking moralist, and so like fuck
Yeah.
fuck that. But
God, I'm
but
listening
like
to a book right now and about
yeah,
the Cold War and
yeah,
like I mean
yeah.
fucking Kissinger, man.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
I mean, yeah,
He's like the Khmer Rouge is bad, right? But like, like they keep the Vietnamese at bay, and
well,
I'm like, Jesus Christ.
well, I mean, I think that realpolitik has a place as sort of like an analytical tool, right? Like, I think
Yeah.
like trying to look at the world in that lens, sort of just, you know, let's take a step back for a second here and think about like similar to what we talked about at the beginning, like when I was talking about how I think about how different age groups and different demographic groups sort of view politics.
Yeah.
I think it's important to sort of think about like how different polities and their governments, their attendant governments view geopolitics, and sort of think about that. Like think about the world that they're in. Um, we spoke before we went live about like one of the podcasts like I really love, like The Rest Is Politics
Mhm.
by former Tory minister, and actually he originally was a Labor minister and became a Tory, uh, uh, Rory Stewart, and Alistair Campbell, who is sort of a senior official in the Gordon Brown government. Um, and it's really, I mean, it's really interesting to listen to their perspective, and
Right.
very sobering the way that they view it. And coming away from sort of the way they look at this, right, is a Europe that is in shock, that kind of doesn't know which way to move. A Europe that sort of understands the threat of China, but is sort of stayed by its economic dependency on it.
Mhm.
Europe has an energy crisis that has been roiling now for years as a result of the war in Ukraine, and the ways in which that has sort of
Right.
disrupted the energy flows, which Europe, very unwisely, it would seem
Yeah, they put
in
all their eggs in the
retrospect.
Russian
Yeah,
basket. How's
yeah,
that ever
yeah,
worked
yeah,
out?
yeah. So I mean, and so you know, uh, they you have to sort of like peel back these layers if you're trying to like ask yourself like how could a war start, and you just keep going deeper and deeper, and you just start thinking about incentive structures, and always remembering that like all of these countries at the end of the day they're gonna look out for job number one when the rubber hits the road, right?
Sure.
And so you just start having to think about like what are the kind of stressor scenarios that could lead to a conflict, that could lead to a conflict that could spill over into something that has a large percentage of global military power engaged in some way somewhere, potentially between them.
Mhm.
And I mean, and those scenarios are not hard to imagine. And starting a war in the Caribbean with a Russian and Chinese ally, which by the way, I mean, not that I care about the fact that Venezuela is a Chinese and Russian ally, because these are evil fucking countries. And as I stated very clearly, like, I mean, I wish that Maduro would depart this mortal realm sooner rather than later, given how evil I think he is. but like you also still do have to like recognize that China and Russia are going to act in ways that protect their interests, and these kinds of moves operate in two ways. They operate in the way of sort of like, creating direct sort of, political economic threat, to the power structures of these countries, but maybe even more importantly, in the court of public opinion, the global public opinion,
Yeah.
particularly the opinion of the global South, right? Like like Africa and South America, which, have a somewhat more cynical view of the great power competition that's
Which
playing
I
out.
think is completely warranted,
Yeah,
given
exactly.
given how the World Bank, the IMF, and everybody else keeps them wrapped up.
Yeah. And so in that world, like where you don't have this rules-based international order anymore, where Europe is like, kind of scared shitless. They have a war on their eastern frontier. You have China that feels like really threatened by the United States, right? They feel trapped behind that first island chain. And if they are going to invade Taiwan, they're going to have to do it from the east side coast, because the west side of Taiwan are cliffs. There's no beaches on the west side of Taiwan, so they have to sort of circumnavigate.
And it's a 90-mile crossing, right? It's not like
Yeah, and so
it's not like, Dover to Calais,
yeah, and
right?
so like and in that world, right, like uh the posture of the United States and its allies, Japan, South Korea, and the United States is threatening to China, because we're trying to contain them for good reason. But like when you start thinking about the United States getting bogged down in a war in South America, and China's sitting here thinking about like, well, we got a few things to think about here. We have the fact that like, the Taiwanese, like the Taiwanese are very quickly building up their drone
Mhm.
capabilities. They already do have a pretty advanced arsenal, and they're building that up. And China's looking at Ukraine right now and thinking to themselves, look, this is a world where we're with drone technology and stuff, that small countries now have the means to sort of like, you know, make big countries pay big costs for, David and Goliath type wars.
Well,
And
remember, throughout history, little countries didn't need drones to make big countries pay.
Mhm.
We're
Mhm.
we've done
Yeah,
that several times.
yeah. And so if you're looking at it from that perspective, and China is thinking to themselves, like, we need to take fucking Taiwan. Like, we can't have this fucking first island chain problem, like vis-a-vis like because China has to be thinking like long term, that the US could get its act together, that Europe could get its act together, that it could reemerge as a major threat in the 2030s if we get back to, something that looks like a liberal politics. China has to like worry, especially if they're looking at the Epstein scandal and stuff right now, and like worrying like, is it possible that liberal democratic forces in the West over the next 10 years could reconsolidate power, could reform alliances, could get their military production complex in order. So they have to think about that like long term.
Well,
And
and I want to come after we're done talking about this. I want to come back to that 10-year window. So, but
yeah,
please continue.
yeah. And so if you're China, and you also have a few other things to look at, right? Like you have a demographic time bomb, right? Which was a problem that they introduced to themselves, although it seems to be a problem for the whole world now with the declining birth rates. But they have been below replacement rate for a very, very
Right.
long time as a consequence of the one child policy. And they are now so they have declining population now. So China's
And it's
past
going to
peak.
be hundreds of millions of people less by the end of the century.
Yeah, so I mean they're already about 100 million off their peak
Yeah.
actually. So they've declined 100 million from their peak population, I think, based on best estimates. So what
It's
this what
incredible.
this what this what this means is that from where we are right now, they have the size of fighting age young men in China is about the biggest it's ever going to be.
Right.
Um, and there's like other like potential like headwinds and stuff like that. So if the US gets itself bogged down and China kind of feels Europe's bogged down with all their resources
Right.
focused
Why not
towards
take the
Ukraine and
shot?
their eastern frontier, and the US is bogged down in the Western Hemisphere, um, that could be the kind of thing that leads to a miscalculation that results in a thermonuclear detonation over the city of Los Angeles. I mean, like that. I mean that's the like I think that's a really big thing to be worrying about right
Well,
now.
I would take it a little bit differently. My guess is, at least from a major power, Russia, with the notable asterisk there, that the missiles probably stay in the silos, but that doesn't mean they can't zap a grid, right?
Mhm.
That doesn't mean they can't take a whole bunch of stuff offline. That also doesn't mean that if the Taiwanese feel really threatened, that they couldn't just unplug all their fabs that make however 90% of the world's semiconductors,
Yeah,
right?
I
And
mean,
say you could
I
take
mean,
our country, but you're not taking
well,
this.
I don't. I agree with you that I believe that any war that breaks up between China and the United States will initially be fought conventionally.
Yeah.
Um, but like, I mean, like I mean, the there's simply a major risk. The risk exists with Russia too. It's not zero.
Mhm.
Um, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't fight, to defend ourselves. But like the nuclear war scenario where missiles get launched is likely to happen as a result of miscalculation or misapprehension of um
Right.
of 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 the tactical situation by either side, where you know which forces a desperate move that could literally be a mistake, which creates counter reaction. So like you're moving into a world where a scenario like that is now like plausible,
Right.
and that is that you're talking about civilizational risk there. That's crazy. Like, so you're only kind of like two steps away from where we are today from, finding ourselves there. And we have plausible paths. You know, we have mode, method, and opportunity on the part of Xi Jinping. And and we're we're the ones that are like making that opportunity calculation look more favorable by the ways in which we're imploding internally, that we're politically engaging, and now potentially making the mistake of draining our resources into a quagmire in the Caribbean Sea. So like that's scary. That's a
Right.
scary fucking place to be in history. And
Yeah.
people can say I'm hysterical, but like I mean,
Well, I mean, but it goes
go
back to
ahead.
the whole idea of like Venezuela. We're like, this is where we're gonna go. This is what we're gonna do. Like, this is of all the choices we could make, right?
Mhm.
This is the one. I mean, it just. I mean, it. And I say this, look, I'm an amateur historian myself. It's the same thing. It's like, I mean, let me say this. I think that all of the calculations of the late 40s, 50s, and 60s were wrong about Vietnam, but
Mhm.
at least they had a method to the madness, even if it was madness,
Mhm.
right? Then you're one step down with Iraq, where it was like Rumsfeld and Cheney on September 12th are like, okay, we've got our opportunity, and
Mhm.
Trump and excuse me, and Bush, with whether or not it was Saddam trying to kill his dad or whatever Odyssean thing it was, right? This makes zero sense, right? Like it's not even like we'd fought Saddam once, right? He
Mhm.
had threatened his neighbors, he had killed his people. I mean, Maduro has killed his people, but like we don't even have that, right? There's not even that predicate where it's like, oh yeah, Venezuela's been a thorn in the side of its neighbors. I mean, maybe it has been,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it kind of goes back to the, I mean, like this. I think the point we talked about before about the sort of uh, the the supine Congress,
Yeah.
like such as it um, is also something you have to think is alarming for China, right? Because the thing about the Chinese and everyone who, you know, all Sino watchers sort of like have observed this, right? Is that, they have a different kind of political culture than we
Right.
do. It's informed by, you know, like concepts of strategic patience and sort of like, sort of very like long-term thinking. And and it's not as sort of like normatively grounded as sort of often our reasons for sort of thinking about foreign policy
Right.
commitments. And like at the sort of the center of like sort of like how China thinks about risk, um is around sort of stability and predictability.
Hmm.
And when things are stable and predictable for the Chinese, they're probably playing the long game. They're probably focusing on corporate espionage. They're just trying to like fucking just
Right.
like, slowly take the system over, like, like from the inside out, like quietly and without too much fuss. Um
I mean, we all carry Chinese listening devices in our
yeah,
pocket,
yeah.
right?
And so, in that world, like they're probably not imagining like the necessity of direct confrontation with U.S. hard power,
Right.
and taking on all the sort of like necessary losses that would entail, right? Because like we'd bomb the fucking Three Gorges Dam, and that would be like fucking 300 million people dead, right? Like I mean,
Well,
like
they also
yeah, I mean
hold a lot of our debt, which I
yeah,
assume they want
yeah.
to get paid back
There's
for,
like
right?
there's shit. I mean, like the Three Gorges Dam is like going away if there's a world war, right? Like so,
Right.
um,
And
and
everything
so
downstream of it too.
yeah, and so like if China's thinking like we're gonna like if China goes to war with us, they're going to war with us on the basis that they're willing to pay that cost, right?
Yeah.
Um and and the reason why they would pay that cost is if the question from their view was a matter of regime survival, right? As
Right.
sort of the sort of the most important thing that Xi Jinping is going to be thinking about. And then and secondarily, right? Like below that, right? Is a some uh level, some acceptable level of survival, right, at the civilizational level, that guarantees the regime's survival. Like that's the way in which like these kinds of actors with this amount of power in the world think, right? Which is different than the way democracies think.
Right.
We're more defensively postured by our very nature because we don't really see any value in conquest, right? um
Ideally, right.
yeah, I like ideally, yeah, like if we're functioning moral democracies, that is, right? Um and so like Trump starting a war, just like, you know, by just shooting from the hip, and China is sort of observing that like none of the normal sort of institutional predictive mechanisms that they use to analyze US behavior function anymore. That makes them have to change their risk assessment and their posture towards
Mhm.
the United States, which makes them, by definition, more volatile because that implicates questions of regime survival. So, I mean, these are like really like serious perspectives that are very real. That I mean, that
Can I say something about that last piece? I'm sorry to interrupt, Mike. Is remember that after the 2020 campaign,
mhm,
when everything was going haywire leading up to January 6th, remember it was Milley who called his counterpart in Beijing and said, "I promise you, we're going to get through this. I
yeah,
promise you, I've got everything in hand
yeah,
here."
yeah,
Right.
and because and the reason he made that phone call is because of what I just said.
Right. Exactly. That's my point. I was echoing like that. There was someone there in a
Yeah.
position of
Oh
authority to
yeah.
be
Because
able to
yeah,
say,
yeah,
"I
yeah. I mean,
promise you, like it ain't going to happen on my
and that's
watch."
probably happening like right now. Like I have to imagine that like I mean, people might call it treason or something if they found out about it, but like, there probably is some like
There's some
senior military
military
people
attaches outside the
talking to
Berlin
senior
embassy or
military
something.
people in China, basically being
Right.
like, look, man, like fuck, just like
Just be cool, man.
okay,
Be
cool,
cool.
man. Just fucking be cool, man. Like, um, but and by the way, like China's evil, like, right? I will celebrate Xi Jinping's departure from this world just as much as I will Maduro's. but I mean, like I said, we're having a conversation from realpolitik, which actually is uncomfortable for me because
Mm,
I don't like to talk about these people as if they're morally neutral actors, because they're not. They're
they're not.
evil. I mean,
Right.
China's a oppressive surveillance state. But like, I mean, look, I think these are um things that I genuinely worry about. And yeah, so I think that we're in a moment of incredible risk geopolitically right now. And like, I mean, I wouldn't, I I mean, I'll be surprised if we end up in a war in the next year that spirals and ends up and
Mm.
turns into global conflict. But I also won't be,
Yeah.
for all the reasons I just laid out.
Okay, so let's cross some fingers and rub our rabbit's feet and hang our horseshoes upside down so the luck stays in them. Um, let's talk about the next 10 years.
Yeah.
My sense is in the next 10 years the meta fight in the United States is going to and I just sort of started dreaming this up this morning, Mike, so this is very fresh and has very little
All
underpinning.
right.
Is Bannonism versus something good. I don't know what that is. I don't have a name for it yet.
Mm-hmm.
But Bannonism is the main opponent. That's the bad path. That's the path to
Mm-hmm.
darkness.
Yeah.
And my concern is, going back to some domestic politics for a few minutes, is that the establishment wing of the Democratic Party is not the opposition, is not opposition one, but two, is not in any way prepared or willing to be the opposition that could put a stop to, let's call it Trumpism, Bannonism, right? We'll call
Mm-hmm.
it Marxism, Leninism, Trumpism, Bannonism, right?
Mm-hmm.
That like they are, if they believed that their cultural and financial interests would be, would be safe, relatively speaking, that they'd be okay with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, like I don't, I have a lot of complex thoughts. So we're really trying to like think about like what is the evolution of the post-Trump right, right?
Mhm.
What like how should we think about the ways in which the various coalitions that make up what we call the right, and sort of the people who vote for the Republican Party primarily lean in that direction. What are the factional dynamics playing out? I'd say they're a little bit more complicated than Bannonism. Bannon is, of course, is like a very controversial figure for all of us who are not in that world.
Mhm.
But he's also controversial in that world. There are some divisions there, right? Like you have there's a sort of a communitarian, right?
Mhm.
It's sort of a new kind of movement. You have these figures like N.S. Lyons, for example, Christian nationalists that sort of also kind of bleed into somewhat less radical, but still kind of like, very kind of uh not I mean you have the kind of there's like really kind of like two gradations there in
Mhm.
in terms of like what I see evolving on the right. On one hand, like, yeah, you have the sort of the Russell Votes of the world that are just like fucking hardcore, like Handmaid's Tale, like
Right.
let's go full fucking theocracy.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's like less radical voices in that world that are more sort of like looking for like, they just want to make the United States the 1950s again, but largely let it
Bring
remain.
back organized labor and
Yeah.
90% marginal tax rates.
And like, and they're like, they want to like roll the culture back to like that. They don't necessarily want to like end democracy. They're kind of like really, they're the kind of like the born again social conservatives that are trying to like find some middle ground. And there's some kind of evidence that like, if you're paying close attention to what's kind of happening in sort of like, Catholic, the sort of the Catholic community, and the some increasingly fringes of the evangelical community
Right.
that are sort of like, trying to maybe pull a little bit away from anti-democratic politics and maybe just more towards a more kind of social conservative, but still like on the level democratic politics. There is that there. We should acknowledge it. And some of that has and some of that's being propelled by Pope Leo and like so there's stuff happening there. It's a time of very complex and unstable change. The one thing that I think about when I'm trying to do cultural analysis on the right and thinking about how things might evolve there.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, this is, and by the way, like all of my predictions here are going to be complete bullshit because this
Of
is
course.
just too complicated of a problem that anybody
Right.
could reasonably create a working model.
Yeah,
but
but
like,
we're not you and I aren't having this conversation because
yeah,
we diagrammed it all out. We're
yeah,
having it because you have to start somewhere.
yeah. So like everything I'm gonna, as I walk through my intuitions here of how I'm seeing things evolve, I just like want to just state like very clearly that I'm aware of my own limits here because like culture is just like I mean, how you
You'll
can't
never make it in cable news like that,
yeah,
Mike.
you can't apprehend culture, so it's not something that one can predict its evolution. So I mean, like I think that but I intuitively I see some like big sort of uh like I see some joint issues, some cultural joints on the
Okay.
right. The biggest one for me, I think, is the evangelical community and the megachurch community and how tied that is to MAGA.
Mm-hmm.
And how there's sort of this, I mean, it's sort of like, uh, you know, uh, it's like consumerist, like fucking some nihilistic commercial Christianity
Yeah, it's the
that
what do
they're
they call
selling.
it? It's the prosperity gospel.
Mick Christianity.
Yeah.
And like, and so I wonder about that community in a world now where Donald Trump just goes down on this Epstein scandal, which looks plausible now. And, you can probably tell from my writing, like I think a lot about social psychology and stuff. And so I try to like think about like like how are people like that, right, who really have tied their identity to a sort of a story about the world, right,
Mm-hmm.
that that Jesus is king and Trump is his instrument on earth, and trying to really like rebuild your worldview that you've built up so methodically and algorithmically force fed for 10 fucking years. Like what I mean, at the individual level, I can make some sort of predictions about how like various personality types react to that, like just based on like, my instincts from being a people watcher my whole life.
Right.
But at a group level, right? Where you're gonna have sort of like kind of power competition around who's going to be the new leader of this world, like who's going to be like the the Jerry Falwell of this moment, who's going to sort of like bring it all together. I mean, there's some candidates there, but I mean like
the level of cognitive dissonance that's already at work. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I'm a little bit less. I hate optimistic's not the right word, but I can't think of a better one. Is that to your point about these people being in this sway for 10 years? Is their immediate psychological instinct is to retrench, not to leave.
yeah.
Right. And I think to me, the only way that really begins to occur is when he leaves. When it won't necessarily be tied to him anymore. It will be, like that time we had that time and now that time has ended. Right.
Yeah.
Now there's something else out there. Is it socially, like after certain wars or after dictators die, is it socially unacceptable to be, to create a hagiography around that person?
Mhm.
Right. I don't know. But I think so long as he is around,
I mean,
that it's going to be very difficult.
It's also possible that like we could just like see what we could see collapse and disillusionment scenario where that community just basically fragments, and you get the what you're talking about there, which is the sort of, crazy radicals who will, like, tell themselves a story about how, like, Donald Trump is like Jesus 2.0 and this is his persecution, and the Romans are in the
Right.
process of stringing him up on the cross, and they'll tell themselves this crazy story. I mean, I suspect there'll be some of that, given how cultish some of these people are. There'll be others, though, that, like, just they'll get really depressed. Like, I wouldn't
Yeah.
be surprised
They'll
if,
go back to where they came from. These people, a lot of these folks were not involved politically until he showed
yeah,
up. And there's a really
yeah,
good chance that without him there, they're like, the whole to hell with all of them. He was the only reason I was
yeah.
here anyway.
Uh, some of them may gravitate towards other dark parts of the right that are forming today. Um, I mean, it's the fact that we have the internet today
Right.
and Elon Musk and fucking X and shit like that, that has these sort of radicalization fire hoses, is one of the scary elements in this moment, because, like, what you normally would want is, like, some kind of, like, decompression, some sort of de-radicalization at a societal level, but that's not what's going to happen. There's going to be algorithms that produce narrative training wheels for this group, and one wonders if that's going to result in something that's scarier than even you or I are imagining right now, Reed.
Yeah, well, again, it could, and that goes back to my original point: is what if we know, if all of the different puzzle pieces that you've just laid out and that we've described could happen and could, you know, break apart and reform and coalesce back into something, you know, as ugly or uglier, right? Then what does the opposition have to look like? Or what does the countervailing force, what countervailing force do we need to create? Because it's not just going to happen, right? Like the good guys aren't just going to win. There's got to be some plan, right? I mean, that you mentioned Russell Vogt. Like I wrote a piece, right after Cheney
Evil,
died. Like,
evil motherfucker.
right. Look, I worked for Dick Cheney, right? 25 years ago. And the
Are
one
you
thing, huh?
are you so I mean, and are you attending the funeral?
No, I am not.
Okay.
Um, I was invited. I was invited, but not going to attend. Um, and the one thing that you see if you look at Cheney's career is that when he had the opportunity to understand and obtain power, he did everything he could, and when he had power, he did everything to expand it. Right,
Mhm.
and I think that's very much what Russell Vogt is doing. Is like he's not just going to give up because you don't like him,
Yeah.
right? He's not just going to give up because something
Well, he's a
doesn't
true
poll well.
he's a true believer.
Right. That's my
Yeah, I
point.
mean, I mean,
I
I
mean,
mean, I mean, like,
Cheney was a true believer in power almost for its own sake, right?
yeah,
Vogt has a different is a believer in power for a particular cultural and
yeah.
worldview that
For an
he
inch,
wants to.
he has an instrumental view of power, and he wants to wield it in
Right.
service in service of his radical political goals. So yeah, we both agree. We have the same read of the man. Read.
Right. And remember that if I was reading a book by a couple of, I think, New York Times reporters about it was a couple of years ago when all that insanity was happening with Kevin McCarthy and everything else. And there's a passage about Vogt in their book about the fact that he had some shitty office with like ceiling tiles that were leaking and rats that ran across the floor. And this is the one thing that you have seen the right has been very good at for the past 50 or 60 years is like you mentioned the Chinese, like they play the long game. They set up
Mhm.
all of these structures. They created all of this infrastructure, all of these organizations, all of these pipelines of money and everything else, so that when someone like a Donald Trump appeared, right, it was preparation meets opportunity. They got
Yep.
lucky,
Yep.
right? But I mean, Reagan was Reagan, but he was Reagan. George H.W. Bush, for as far as they were concerned, was an apostate, right? George W. Bush was good, but he wasn't a true believer.
Mhm.
And Trump was like, yeah, whatever you want, I'm good with.
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Um,
Trump is not a true believer in anything.
Trump is not a true believer except in himself.
Yeah, I mean,
But to your point about what are the first roadblocks that we have to build, and then what are the bulldozers that we need to design and construct to start pushing this stuff back?
well, I mean, we're doing it. I mean, look, the thing is we have to be like, we have to be uh, bold. We have to be bold in mission and modest in expectations.
Right.
Like from from where we are, right?
I'm
We're
stealing that,
fragment.
by the way.
Yeah, we're a fragmented society, deeply fragmented at the epistemic level, like right in terms of all the various stories that we all live. Like, if you're the kind of person that only consumes, manosphere podcasts, your view of the world looks markedly different than mine.
Right.
And when we have when we have conversations over beers, that becomes eminently clear. And you're like, I never heard about the fact that a helicopter landed on a South Shore apartment building in Chicago and then kicked down the fucking doors of everyone in there without individualized warrants. What are you talking about, Mike? I never heard about that. And so I mean, the way this works, right, is, and I think Substack's great for that. I think like these like little Substack lives, they may seem, I mean, this is me thinking about it. I'm thinking about this as a sort of a social epistemologist.
Sure.
I'm not that that's my official title, but I mean just like functional.
I'm going to get you a plaque that you hang behind you on your wall.
That's not what I am, but I'm doing social epistemology by making this observation.
Sure.
Which is to say that like talking, like having ways that, and by the way, there's like lots of, I need to be clear, right? Like I mean, there's a lot of amazing work being done by a community known as like the plurality community. And you should like look into things like Polis and V Taiwan and Audrey Tong and Glenn Weil. And there's a lot of like interesting work being done there, like to build a better internet that I think like democratic forces should be thinking about. I want to plug those people because they're doing amazing work. But in the here and now, right, like with the tools that we currently do have, like at scale, I think Substack is actually great. Like I'm kind of like, I think it's doing a good thing. Obviously, it's a single company, and I always worry about what could happen if pressure were put on Chris Best and team. But I think these little conversations, these little groups we're having, they do like have sort of like bleed over effects, and they do have an opportunity to build connection across these epistemic groups. And so we need to have like as many people like you and me talking across these epistemic groups right now, and serving as sense makers, people who are actually invested in understanding the truth and communicating the truth in ways that like people can understand that, like across these things. And that allows us to sort of do something that only democracy can do, that authoritarianism can't, which is fight a million fights at the same time, right? With self-sufficient generals. We talked about like, like Destiny and these streamers and all of these people like fighting on different parts of the battlefield, like simultaneously, generally aligned on the same mission, aiming at different parts of civil society. That's something that we can do. I mean, that's what we are doing right now, you and me, even in our own small little way. And so we should feel proud that we're doing that we're putting that effort in, and it has an effect. It really does. And so, like, because I think when like people are asking like the question, like, what can we do? It's like, well, should I create a think tank, or should I like, like start a super PAC, or it's like,
I got all
like,
those things.
Yeah, these like these very like
I don't need more of those.
These very like mechanical things, but like no, like just being engaged, understanding, knowing, and having that information in your head for when you actually have to make a decision, like cast a ballot, or or have that dinner table conversation with the rest of your family so they fucking understand what's at stake. So that turns into a few more ballots that get cast. Like those sort of like cascading features of like civil society are really important. And so that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Cause like,
Mhm.
even if I'm only making like a 0 point whatever fucking percent difference in the narrative by being here and engaging in this way, it matters.
Right.
That's
Well, and
that's that's what we're doing it. We're doing the thing we
right.
should do.
Well, listen, as that is an optimistic note from, I'm not going to call him the one and only Mike Brock, but one of the Mike Brocks. And in that case, as soon as I get optimism, I say now is time. All right. So Mike Brock Prime, where can everybody find your work?
You can find me at Notes from the Circus on Substack, or search me up like Mike Brock. I'm trying to, I do it full time, writing full time right now, and so I try to post every day. Sometimes more than once a day, actually, if I have some stamina. So yeah, check me out.
All right. Well, listen, man, I do appreciate it. I hope we can do this again soon. If I don't talk to you before then, I hope you have a happy and safe Thanksgiving. And to
Thank you.
everybody
You
out there
too.
who's hung with us on this home front after dark, I'll call it. I certainly appreciate it. I saw the comments. Appreciate all the passion I'm seeing. Mike, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
All right, man. We'll see you next time. Everybody else, be safe. Bye bye.